And I think that's one of the things you can do with art. It make an image that is critical, but it allows people to think about it. I mean, I don't consider what I do propaganda because I'm not telling people go and do this or go and do that. I'm actually just pointing out these things and joining things together that are usually separate.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Art Persists Podcast, a series by Bosler Arts offering a glimpse into the life of artists and activists from all over the world, here to share their stories with you, the listener. My name's Georgia and today we are joined by London-based artist and activist Peter Kennard. Since the 1970s, Peter has produced some of our most iconic and influential images of resistance and dissent, from the Vietnam War, anti-Apartheid movement, campaign for nuclear disarmament, and most recently, campaign against the war in Ukraine and the siege on Gaza. I chat to Peter about his incredible life's work, spanning 5 decades where he's dedicated his art and activism towards anti-war movements, anti-capitalist movements, anti-corporation movements, and so much more. We chat about his latest exhibition, Archives of Dissent, which is currently taking place at the Whitechapel Gallery in London. Hope you enjoy. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the Art Persists Podcast. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much. So your latest exhibition, Archive of Dissent, is currently on display at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, showing the work from the last 5 decades. We're going to get into it more, but I wanted to ask you as the first question, just how you're reflecting on it. How has it felt to open the show and kind of look back on the last 5 decades of your work?
Yeah. Well, I'm really pleased to be showing the Whitechapel. It's got a special history for me. I'm from London. I used to go. In fact, I went there in the first show I saw, like, of Rauschenberg was 1974, all that time ago. Yeah. And also the fact that it's in the East End and it's, and it was very connected to its radical past. The area I'm showing in was the library, Whitechapel Library. And that was used by, originally it was used by a lot of the Jewish emigres, including writers and artists, and then by the Bangladeshi community and Caribbean. And it was a meeting place for people, and they came to look at newspapers and talk and to stay warm. Now, most of them were living in poverty, so they didn't, they went there, and it's got that atmosphere to it still. So I've tried to make a show that sort of reflects that in some way by putting a lot of newspaper work I've done in it and using the sort of furniture of the library. So in that way, it's got its own history to it. So I'm really pleased to be showing there.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I really like the kind of reading aspect of it as well, because I liked just sitting on those tables as well, just reading through the books that you've written and that kind of thing. It makes it a really nice space to just go to, actually. So it's really powerful.
Yeah. No, it's very much based on the history. You can, I can feel the history of the place when I'm in there. So
yeah,
and obviously the Whitechapel is, it's very unusual because it's an East End gallery, and the East End's got this enormous tradition of radicalism and anti-fascism. Cable Street's down the road, and there's that whole aspect of it.
Absolutely. And so tell us a bit about your early life. Where did you grow up and what was life like?
What was life like? Well, I grew up in London in Paddington, and in a flat there, and I started painting. I got into paint, and when I started, I used there was a coal shed down in the bottom of our flats that stopped being used because they stopped using coal. It became a smokeless.
Yeah.
So I used that as a studio. I turned it into a studio when I was about 13, and started painting. And I just got totally into painting and being very influenced by different people like Bacon and Giacometti, and it was that sort of period doing figurative art. And then I went to school in Marylebone, drama school, and it was I couldn't stand it really, so I left at 16 and went to a place called Byam Shaw School of Art, which was great. And then I went on to the Slade when I was 18. So that was in the late 60s. So it was a pretty wild time to be a student. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah.
Amazing. Did you come from a kind of political activist family? Was that something that was talked about a lot in your home?
Yeah, they were. Well, my dad was had wanted to be an artist himself, and he went for a year to art school, but they couldn't afford it anymore, so he stopped, and he went into advertising, and so he was very, in a sense, he was always disappointed artist in that way, that he would have liked to have carried on with it, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but he took me to a lot of exhibitions. We went, like to the Whitechapel and Camden Art Centre and all the sort of public galleries around. So they were very receptive to, the fact I wanted to be an artist. My parents didn't fight him. My mum was a secretary, and she was very into, especially the sort of work I did then. They got a bit upset at some of the stuff that got more and more political and less like stuff you want to put on the wall, basically. And then so I went to Slade, and then I got involved in there was a lot of demonstrations against the war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And it was the time of the war. So it was then that I went on the big demonstration, Grosvenor Square. It's quite famous now, the 68 one, where the police were let loose on their horses and were quite violent. So I wanted to find a way to make work that related to what was going on. And that's when I stopped doing painting, in a sense, because painting I felt had it's got this great history. So it becomes more of a formal thing in terms of, when you look at it, you're looking at it in relation to the whole history of painting. So, well, that's how I felt at the time. And then, so I started using photography and getting photos of Vietnam, what was going on, and of what was going on in the civil rights movement in the States, and finding a way to amalgamate all these things. I put all these images onto negative, and then sandwich the negatives together, and made these sort of multiple images that showed the sort of relationship between, like the people that were supporting the protests against the Vietnam War and the war itself and the civil rights, and putting them all together, and made a whole series of paintings about that.
Yeah, I think that's it's one of the reasons why I really like your work, is it's actually something that we try and do a lot at Bosler Arts as well, which is to look at how everything is connected to us. Nothing that's going on in any other part of the world is disconnected to us, and it's just about finding ways to kind of show people that they can relate and that they should care about these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've done, and I do a lot of workshops with different groups, and often with an artist called Kat Phillips, who I've worked with over the years. And we bring tons of magazines and computers and scanners and things, and then people can relate. Like especially young people. We've done quite a lot with really young people, and they can pull out a page from a car advert and put it next to their own photos and start making things. One of the things about sort of capitalism is that things aren't related in terms of imagery. You get your adverts and then you get something else. Whereas with montage, or just cutting things together, is quite a revelation for people in terms of thinking about their own situation and thinking about their sort of political beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually a quote from something you wrote that I just wanted to read out, because I think it just sums it up so well. You said, "My photo montages attempt to rip apart the smooth, apparently seamless surface of official deceit to expose the conflict underneath." And I think it says it so well, because you whether you're talking about like capitalism or conflict or, you know, wars or arms sales, it's always this sense of like the official narrative or the shiny product that's being shown, and
Yeah.
then you contrast it with the reality of it.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of the things about our system is that you get, like arms companies, they produce these glossy leaflets of bombs and bullets and put them in vitrines in the arms fair,
Yeah.
Excel Arms Fair. And obviously, they're separated from the victims of it. You don't see that, And at the moment, with what's going on in Gaza, I mean, that's been a terrible revelation for people to see this horror of all these children and women and children and everybody, all Palestinians, under the rubble.
Yeah.
Those are the things you don't, and you obviously don't see much of that on the official news, but you
Yeah.
see it on online, on Twitter.
Absolutely.
I think the sort of deceit and inhumanity of our political system has really got through to people, especially to it's got through to young people. I mean, I think the fact that students in the States and here have been camping outside their universities in support of Palestine has been fantastic. It's been really optimistic that
Yeah.
it's got through to them the reality of it.
Absolutely. I think it's so, it's just one of those big moments, I think, that changes people's perceptions.
Yeah, I think it's a real game changer. I mean, to see the day after day the horror is something that, I mean, I've never seen it experienced, because obviously now people are filming it
Yeah.
on their mobiles, and to actually see the sort of total inhumanity of what's going on, and
Yeah.
like they're aiming it. They've almost destroyed the whole of Gaza. All the universities have gone. The hospitals are nearly gone. And the children are being shot. And it is a ongoing horror, and it's something that is quite new in a sense, I think, to see it, and it's still going
Yeah.
on.
And I wanted to kind of reflect on what's going on in Gaza with you, actually, because, you've mentioned before that this sort of idea that you're like the feeling of drowning when it comes to the mass influx of images that we see. And as you've mentioned, what's slightly different about what's going on in Gaza at the moment is that obviously we have social media, but also video footage. So we are, you just look on your phone and you are you can watch people dying, children dying constantly.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, because I think then the other side is that once people start to see it a lot, they actually become accustomed to it in a way, slightly fatigued. It's a strange feeling of like, I feel like at the beginning everyone was so upset and angry, and people still are, but there's also a slight weird fatigue that comes with endless videos. How do you reflect on it, and what role do you think maybe, for photo montage or art comes with it as well?
Well, I think, you talk about a fatigue. I think it's also people can't stand looking at it every day.
Yeah.
I mean, to see, kids' legs coming out from under the rubble and whatever. I mean, it's people I've talked to say, stop looking at it because they can't take it.
Yes.
So I don't think it's fatigue so much as horror, and then knowing that there isn't much you can do. We go on marches every fortnight, which are important because it's, you get a fantastic range of people of ages and nationalities, and a feeling of comradeship from it. But there isn't, a lot you can do. We've now got a Labour government that's doing bugger all about it, or pretending to take away, where it's just taken away some licenses for arms, but very small number.
Yeah, 50 or something.
So there is that feeling of, like what can you do? And I suppose with imagery, with montage, it's just another way to symbolize it. And I've tried to do things that, I mean, most of them don't work. It's very difficult to make something about something so horrific while it's going on. So it's more like I did one of the Palestinian flag with a sort of the triangle of the red triangle becoming like blood dripping. And I think that sort of image might work because it's symbolic and then it stays in people's minds.
Yeah.
But it's something that you can look at. So, I mean, it's a big question in political art. How much horror do you put in, or does that stop people from looking?
Yeah.
Which, there's a guy called Thomas Hirschhorn, do you know his work? Yeah, I mean, he does really strong images. I mean, he takes the news images and of the sort of massacres and the horrors, but in some ways, that's to me, that's sort of that's not giving people a space to think about it. And I think that's one of the things you can do with art. You make an image that is critical, but it allows people to think about it. I mean, I don't consider what I do propaganda because I'm not telling people go and do this or go and do that. I'm actually just pointing out these things and joining, like you talked about, joining things together that are usually separate.
Yeah.
You never see the politicians with the slaughter in the same image. It's one of the reasons for making montage. Is that you can put them together.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to do.
Absolutely. And obviously, like throughout your whole career, you've done it in such important moments and to such powerful, effects, whether it's, the bomb, Hiroshima bomb with the skeleton, which makes which forces people, I think, to think about what actually happened rather than this image of like a huge, mushroom cloud.
Mushroom cloud, yeah.
Yeah.
A poster that people called Athena, who used to have all these poster shops around the country, and they had a fucking great poster airbrushed of a mushroom cloud with no words on it, and that was supposed to be, and it was very popular. As a sort of thing to put up in your bedroom. It became so. That's originally why I did those images. That when the cruise missiles came, I got involved with CND, and I wanted to do something that actually, if you look at that image of mushroom clouds, you connect it to what it caused, which was 200,000 deaths in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah. So it's making that connection in one image, and that relates. I mean, people sometimes think it relates to sort of Dadaism and that sort of way, but in fact, it's more about surrealism, I think, because surrealism, you're trying to join images together, and in my montages, I try and join images so they have a reality about them. It's not like spread out across as a collage. It's put together so that I find one image and then another image, and they seem to fit together. It's that fitting together that's important,
Definitely. I think one of the examples that you've done of that has really stayed with me is of apartheid in South Africa, where you have a European-only woman bench with a woman sitting on it, and then this really horrific scene underneath, and that kind of contrast really brings it into the forefront of like what was going on there.
Yeah. I mean, it's that contrast and that idea of people looking away. I mean, it's interesting that I don't know if you saw that film that's about the Nazis living next door to the
Auschwitz. I actually haven't seen it yet.
It's very powerful.
But I know the one you mean, about the garden.
Yeah, the garden. Yeah, but the director talks about a sort of ambient genocide. It's ambient because it's going on while we're living our lives separately. From that. I mean, it's a bit like what's going on now with Gaza. We're continuing, but we know this thing's going on.
Exactly.
Hi, this is Hussam Fazullah, co-founder of Bosla Arts. The Art Persists Podcast is independently run by Bosla Arts, me and Georgia, which allows us to share these important conversations with artists and activists from all over the world. In order to keep having these conversations, we need your help. Join us on Patreon for as little as £3 and help us continue this vital work. More info in the episode description. Now back to the podcast.
I think another thing that you do so well is kind of talking about how in conflicts, occupied people are so dehumanized. And I think, just relating it back to Gaza, we're seeing it a lot with the kind of narrative that is coming out. But obviously you did so much on Iraq and really looking at how this idea of dehumanizing the people to also justify collateral damage as well, so collateral damage. And this idea that civilian deaths are justified for the greater cause.
Yeah.
How have you tried to kind of challenge dehumanization in your work, do you think?
Well, it's not. The work I do is not a conscious. I don't sort of decide in a sense. It's something that is quite emotional. And I try and just respond to things as they're happening. Hopefully I give the people that are the victims of all the horror, give them a humanity that, as you say, is extinguished in these wars and that we've got going. Like in Iraq, there's different estimates, but probably nearly a million people died. And it was something that it was just an ongoing thing. That's why I went on, and I made a lot of work with Cat Phillips at that time, and we just wanted to keep the memory going of it in different ways. In the work, it's that thing of keeping going with it. And the awful thing is, I've been doing this sort of work for about 50 years, and of course, it's still relevant. The stuff, the stuff of CND, we're spending 150 billion on reconditioning Trident, and and American missiles are coming back to Lakenheath. At the moment, they're building underground silos for them. So all these things, people say, well, it must be a good feeling that you've done it. Then these things are still around, but it's not really a good feeling, because the fact that they're still around, means that they're not exactly successful. But images, I never believe images can, art can do it on its own, but I think it can do it as I call it a visual arm of the organizations. That's why, like with the Palestinian flag one, I gave it to Stop the War, who's selling it as a poster. So giving it to the organizations that are involved, and obviously sometimes I get images from them, then I turn it into a poster or something, and then they can sell the poster, because they're, they've funding for these things is all from supporters. They've got that. So there is a sort of circle sometimes in the work with that.
Absolutely. And obviously, like, your work has also appeared on, in many protests, and the power of seeing them. How does that feel when you see your work being used alongside a movement or a protest?
Well, it's good. I believe that art shouldn't. From what I do, is I don't want it to be esoteric just for an art audience. I really believe in galleries, because they're the one place where people can spend time with work and look at it in a different way. But I also like to make work that can be used on demos. And if the work is what I consider good enough, or in my eyes good enough, then it can also be shown in a gallery. I've never had a thing about, I know some of my students in the past have, they say to me, I've been offered this show at the gallery. Do you think it'll be good for my career? And I think, well, you should show it anyway. When I left art school, if you could get a show in a mixed show in a library, you thought, wow, great, I'm going to show something. So, I think it's really important to show, especially the sort of stuff I do. So it goes on T-shirts, and it goes on badges, and posters, and it was a lot in the independent press and the sort of post-hippie lefty press that doesn't exist in the same way now because it's mostly online.
Yeah.
I do always push organizations to try and make, like if they're having a demo, to make posters that can go up in the street. Then it's fighting all the enormous capitalist posters that are selling all this crap to us.
Yeah.
And it becomes a shock in the street to see it. Whereas online, there is this thing of a bubble of people who will see it, and that's a problem, I think.
Absolutely. And it does, when you see something in the street that is not an ad, it does shock you. It's just like
it does,
it makes you look at it more.
Yeah, people wonder what it's selling. To start with, because we're so attuned to that idea of all these ads selling us stuff. Yeah.
I bet. And even the opposite way. I remember, I think I was in Shoreditch a few months ago, and I saw a mural painted, and I was like, "Wow, what is this mural? It looks so nice." Da, da, da. And then I realized it was an advert for Netflix that they had painted as a mural.
Oh, right.
They've got,
yeah. Well, I remember in Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, she talks about, like I think it was Nike. Some of their big ads, they actually employed graffiti artists to graffiti over them. It was cool. It's it made them cool. So there is that thing of the we used to call it repressive tolerance, which is a term Marcuse used, which is like the establishment and the system takes it in and then uses it as product. Like all these. I mean, there was a period when all the clothes shops and were called Che Guevara and things like that.
Oh yes.
So it's that's it's something that one's got to fight. And I always think with montage, it's quite difficult to change the meaning. So it does get ripped off a lot all over the place, my stuff. But if it's by people that believe in the same things as I do, then that's fine,
Yeah.
It's difficult for other people to engage with it. Although saying that, I've got to be honest. There's one in the show of Margaret Thatcher as Queen Victoria, a montage, and I was told I went to an opening of a cartoon show, and there were all these Tories love cartoons, but one of them said, "Oh yes, Margaret has that in the bog at number 10. She loves it."
No.
That is a failed montage. I don't know if it's true or if he said it to wind me up, but
oh my God, it's
horribly
believable. Yeah.
I mean, that is something, that sort of thing one's got to watch out for. There was a Cuban painter that used to paint people in the fields, sort of cutting sugarcane and things with a overseer in the painting, a sort of realist painting, and the overseer wanted to buy the painting because he thought that was the way you should be treating the workers, in the fields. So there's that problem with that,
Yeah. God, it's always difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Peter, I wanted to ask you also a bit about censorship, because you were famously censored by the Barbican in 1985 for a series of works you created in response to the 1973 military coup in Chile, led by General Pinochet, which became one of the most brutal reigns of terror on the Chilean people.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a bit about that experience of censorship?
Yeah. Well, I had a show that was it was called In the Pit area at Barbican, and it went with a series of anti-war plays by a playwright called Edward Bond, who was great. He's not that well known now, and probably because he was very anti-war. But I had help putting the show up, and then as just on the night before it was going to open the next day, and the director of the Barbican, not the director of the gallery who'd done it, but of the whole Barbican, and his name was Henry Wrong, spelt like wrong, which is a brilliant name and he came down and said, we can't have that. There were two works, and they showed sort of torture in Chile. Well, one of them showed a Chilean soldier and then a bandaged head next to it. And he said, "Oh, we can't show those because we've got a Chilean minister coming tomorrow, finance minister, who's going to talk to British bankers, and he might get, unhappy about it." And the other one showed us a slaughterhouse. I mean, Chile was a slaughterhouse, total slaughterhouse of the people. And I'd actually taught a lot of Chilean students who'd escaped after the coup at North East London Poly when I was teaching there. So that anyway, the people who put it up refused to take this big thing that we'd hung from the ceiling down. But the next day we came there and they'd covered it in a blanket, sort of felt blanket. It looked like sort of Joseph Beuys hanging up there.
Yeah.
And the other one, the smaller one, they'd unscrewed from the wall. And it showed, I mean, the Barbican, famously, there's been a exhibition about Palestine, where they stopped a speaker doing a lecture about Palestine recently, and the artist put signs up about it. And this was at the time when the blood was flowing in Chile. It was, and yet they would rather not shock a Chilean minister while that was going on. So they covered it in a blanket, and of course it got more publicity because of that. That's the thing about censorship, like it's and they said they weren't censoring it in the letter to the Guardian and things, So it does happen. I mean,
it does.
We get, and another one I did was it was Bob Geldorf. So Bob, he commissioned some artists to do stuff for a Christmas sort of celebration of Christmas by having projections on public buildings. And I did one based on a painting of the Virgin Mary that's in the National Gallery, and I changed the halo into a peace symbol, and then in her, where her face was, I put a picture of the earth. It's quite simple. It's quite added. I mean, it wasn't shocking, and I waited, and I didn't hear anything from Bob, and I contacted them, and he said, "Oh, you've got to talk to Orange." I don't know if you remember. Orange has gone. At that time, they were a big mobile phone manufacturer. They were a big corporation, and they were sponsoring this thing. And mine was going to go up by the river in a government on a building. I don't think it was a government building, but it was an old building. And the woman at Orange, when I contacted, she wrote a letter to the Guardian saying this image would be offensive to to young children and grandmothers. They actually put that. Young children and grandmothers would be offended by it. And it was during the time when these amazing grandmothers went across a loch in Scotland on a boat and smashed up a nuclear submarine. Very famous action, very brave women. So they wouldn't show it, and they showed a big projection of Nigella's mince pies instead.
Oh, for God's sake!
So it does happen. I mean, most of in our society, most of the thing is censorship by exclusion in the art world. Exclude the political work, and at the moment, of course, there's the whole thing of exclusion in relation to Gaza. And here and in Germany, it's incredible. You just can't mention it. But it happens here, but it happens more than one knows because people are excluded.
Definitely.
So you don't hear about it in the sense of it actually reaching that point.
Absolutely. It's been a kind of, I guess, also with social media now, is that people can express themselves but also be excluded or censored because of it, and it is a big issue. It really is.
I mean, I've been very lucky. The Whitechapel have been completely open with me, and they've allowed they haven't censored anything that I wanted to put up in it.
Yeah.
I don't think something like the Tate. I mean, the Tate. One thing it should have done display of Palestinian artists' work. Should be doing that now. It should be responding to what's going on in the world. But no, there's nothing like that there.
Nothing.
And
I think what happened to you also at the Barbican speaks of this issue that's happening now with culture here, which is also the kind of shrinking of public funding. So, lots of institutions are really reliant on these private donations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's, the Sackler scandal as well is a good example.
Yeah. I mean, sponsorship is the big problem, because it has got strings attached, and they don't want it. I mean, I remember, I think it was at the Tate they did it. They couldn't find a sponsor some time back for Francis Bacon, because it was a bit too visceral. I mean, now, but anything. I mean, it's okay to do a sort of birth, copulation, and death. Like sort of Damien Hirst sort of. He does a lot about death, but if you angle it in to particular corporations or name anything, then they don't want it, because sponsors would react and they wouldn't support it. I mean, I think a lot of the YBA whole thing was to do with the fact that their work looked very visceral and gritty, but it didn't actually particularly angle itself at anything in the political system, in
Exactly.
that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying they should. I always think, and in my teaching, I've never pushed any student. I mean, I've made a living doing this sort of work because I've had a teaching job. I've been, I come from a very privileged time. I mean, my generation is completely privileged compared with the shit we've left your generation. And I mean, when I went to art school, I had a grant. I had my fees were paid. I lived in a squat. It was, which is now illegal. Squats get you out straight away. Yeah, all those things that happened. So, nowadays with students, I never tell them to do a certain sort of work, because obviously with making political type work, you're not going to make a living from it particularly. I mean, all the groups I work with, I've never got money from CND or anything like that. I've just given them, So, and of course, young artists now do get sponsorship from different companies, and again, I'm not critical of that. I mean, I wouldn't do it myself, but they've got, people have got to live.
Yeah.
So it's so difficult now to be, especially in London, to be an artist, and to find somewhere to live and to get a studio. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
God.
Yeah.
And so you're a professor of political art at the Royal College of Arts.
Well, I'm retired now.
Are you retired?
I retired 3 months ago on my 75th birthday.
Oh my goodness! Congrats!
So I'm an emeritus, or whatever they call it, professor now.
Wow. Yeah. How does it feel?
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was teaching there nearly 40 years, and then before that at other art schools, and so. I mean, it's great, but it's it is terrible what's happening in art education. That the public money is almost, it's only really there for a bit of research now, so everything has to be got from fees and sponsorship and what have you. So and tons of students coming in.
Yeah.
So it's and Brexit has made it worse. We've got some amazing students from Europe, and there's no way they will come now because of overseas rates are enormous for students.
Yeah.
So
it's really upsetting.
It's got very difficult, but you still get, those great moments in teaching when you get great students, and one can work with them sort of organically. Outside there's a lot of curriculums in teaching now, art schools, which I think is bollocks, a lot of that, I mean, art schools are about people meeting and the students meeting each other and suddenly coming up with something. I mean, there's one group I work with, mainly female students, it was, and they came from all over the fine art and humanities thing in Royal College, and they formed a group called Rage, RAGE, and they're still going, Yeah. I mean, they got together and they were all doing work about their own countries, but through that, and that's something that you can't legislate for. You can't legislate for a lot of stuff in art schools.
Yeah,
it happens.
Amazing. Well, Peter, I've taken a lot of your time, so my final question to you is really, how are you feeling about the future? I mean, we've talked a lot about the past and the current day, but obviously we've got a new government after more than a decade of Tory rule. Are you feeling positive and hopeful for the future? How are you reflecting on it?
Well, I feel positive about young people, like who've been campaigning against what's going on in Gaza and campaigning about climate big time.
Yeah.
Which is so important. I mean, I don't feel optimistic about Labour government. I did actually join Labour for a time when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, and he was an amazing, inspiring influence. And I did some stuff at one of the when they were in Brighton. They had the conference when he was leader, and there were hundreds of young people. You could see they were really fired up, really hopeful, and of all different sorts. They were very non-denominational in that sense, like anarchists and whatever, but they all felt that this guy was real, speaking for them, and that feeling was great. And I'm hoping that feeling will. I mean, it's not there in the Labour Party now, but I think because of the we're living in a time of emergency, so that all the sort of people campaigning against climate catastrophe and all that, and all the young people doing it, that's what I'm optimistic about. I'm not optimistic about the state, which will be, they imprisoned 5 Just Stop Oil people for 5 years and 4 years. So those women got 4 years. Yeah. And the bloke got, I think, 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it's struggles on. I think like everybody, some days you wake up and think, oh fuck, this is, what can I do? It's terrible. And other days, mainly through people being together, you actually feel optimistic. I mean, is that how you feel?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to also I think that's why also the protest for Gaza are so powerful, actually, because you kind of you feel very alone and upset, and then you come together and you realize you're not alone and that people care. And
yeah. And also people in Gaza are seeing it.
Yeah.
They do know that they've got this amazing support all over the world from the demonstrations. Yeah.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I just really look forward to seeing what you do next.
And best of luck with your project. I think it's great.
Thank you so much. We'd like to thank Peter Kennard for joining us for this week's episode. If you'd like to learn more about his work, please find links in the episode description. And if you're London-based, definitely don't miss out on his incredible exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery. And thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Art Persists Podcast. As always, if you are enjoying the podcast, we just ask that you rate us, follow us, and share your favourite episode with friends and family. Only with your help can these incredibly important stories be heard. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with a new episode.